Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons, and we're going to talk about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. So what's really interesting is Spider-Man, Dungeons & Dragons and Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse are two of the same creature type, right? They're both pure dragon, baby. And so basically they're both adventurers. They're not entities, right? And so what's really interesting about the Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse film is that it's a powerful bushwhacker, right? So one of the things I love about Dungeons & Dragons is it bushwhacks. It cuts a new path across tabletop role-playing games. It cuts a new path across narrative. It cuts across a new path across tabletop experience, right? It's a tabletop experience. It's not just a tabletop game. It's a tabletop experience, right? It's really a special thing. It's really, a wonderful thing. It's a really unique thing, right? So, but Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is exactly the same. And Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse does a really good job of, cutting a new path on animation and across intellectual property, just like Dungeons & Dragons. There are things that are happening with intellectual property on Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse that doesn't happen on any other film. It truly is groundbreaking. It's bushwhacking through the forest. It is not following a path that someone else cut. And I think that's one of the reasons why I love Dungeons & Dragons so much is when it comes to tabletop role-playing games, D&D doesn't follow anyone, right? There are other games like Tales of the Valiant, right? They should be ashamed of that game, right? They're literally telling you, most of this is going to be a copy. We're going to turn 2 dials on this, right? You should be ashamed of yourself, right? Like, you're not bushwhacking anything. You're walking a path that's already been walked, right? And it's wasteful. Like, if you're going to do something meaningful, bushwhack the path, right? So one of the things I really love about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is it did something that we've never seen before, and that is it made a fundamental change in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So first of all, the Miles Morales films are part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They're not sitting off in some corner, right? This is Sony, and Spider-Man is part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And so Tom Holland is part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Miles Morales is part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And a lot of people were like, casuals don't even understand this. They don't even know that it is part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? And I could get that. And the reason why is they're like, oh, well, that's not part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe because that movie is an animated movie, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe is live action. Well, what Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse did, right, was it mixed animation and live action. There are shots of Tobey Maguire in this movie that are pure live action. And there are from the live action Tobey Maguire movies, and Tobey Maguire was just in the Tom Holland movies, right? So this is canon on canon on canon, right? And that's another thing is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse really does a fantastic job of actually, it does a really fantastic job of making Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is truly groundbreaking from the perspective of bushwhacking new ground. And I'm just and it mixes this live action with the animated. Now, what's important about this? Well, because Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is made of Dungeons & Dragons, right? We've already discussed this. So the Spider-Verse, the Lego Spider-Verse is canon to Lego. Dungeons & Dragons is canon to Lego, right? It's canon through the Lego Dragon's Keep Journey's End setting, right? So, both are canon worlds. So they're connected. So that means that Dungeons & Dragons can immediately begin taking lessons from its intellectual partner, right? And the first lesson that they should take, right? The first lesson that they can take from their intellectual partner is that Dungeons & Dragons can begin to mix other types of tabletop role-playing game experiences literally in the D&D canon game, right? And so because Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse has done this thing, what we can now do, right, is we can have this mixture, right, of Dungeons and Dragons, board games, and CCGs all in the official Dungeons and Dragons game. So we've already been invited by Magic the Gathering to start doing this, and many but like we don't actually tap mana to cast spells, but we can start to do that. In addition to that, we could take all the parts from the Lords of Waterdeep board game and begin to use them directly in the game, not just as tokens, but literally use the mechanics within Dungeons & Dragons. We can break these rules because Dungeons & Dragons intellectual partner, SpiderMan, in my humble opinion, intellectual partner, and canon co-creator, right, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, we can start to mix these things that normally aren't considered to be together, but by canon can be together because the example of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Every single word of that is my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion, when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking, subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.